stalled right near the I-95 corridor. It is now starting to work its way to the east, but it's also triggering more showers and storms with quite a bit of available moisture. We're seeing heavy rain associated within these storms. There is a flood warning that we talked about, but also that flood watch that expands even farther, coming out of New Haven, Connecticut, all the way north into much of Massachusetts, including Boston, into southern New Hampshire there. You take a look at the Fox model and you'll notice that we got to get through the remaining hours of tonight to finally see some of the worst of these storms and the heaviest of the rain finally work its way offshore. I can tell you, though, in the wake of this front that's been hanging out with us for much of the work week, that's provided the Northeast New England area for very sticky weather and the threat for showers and storms. It's going to move away. We'll have a much better day on Thursday, drier, more refreshing conditions. And this is look at the forecast for Thursday and Friday. Remember, things are going to start to deteriorate. You'll start to see those clouds roll in associated with Lee, especially as we head in through Friday.
We're going to continue to track Lee as New England braces for the hurricane's impacts. Hurricane and tropical storm watches have now been issued for much of coastal New England. We'll have the latest on Lee's path as the storm closes in on the coast.
And the surf is getting dangerous up and down the East Coast. We're going to show you how New York's Long Island is getting ready for Lee. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Fox Weather, your Hurricane HQ. A lot to talk about when it comes to Hurricane Lee. If you're just now joining us, maybe for the first time today, or maybe you haven't tuned in since earlier this morning, we do have some updates to share. This is for the 5 p.m. update from the National Hurricane Center. Not a lot of significant changes when it comes to the overall makeup of Lee. We're still talking about a Category 2 hurricane, those maximum sustained winds at 105 miles per hour. Pressure at about 952 millibars, so a ton of energy. Lee is a massive monster-sized storm that's expected to continue to broaden and flatten out as it heads further to the north, and it's moving north-northwest at about 10 miles per hour, so a little bit of an uptick in the speed. You'll notice we're still south of the eastern seaboard, but we do anticipate Lee to pick up some speed as it continues to weaken as it heads north. The problem with a bigger storm is that it takes a little bit longer to weaken. So it's still going to take all of that energy, especially that moisture, that tropical moisture further up. And you're noticing the latest cone pointing right towards areas, at least on the eastern side of Maine and into the Canadian Maritimes. But by Saturday night, you're still talking about a Category 1 strength storm. Though designation won't be particularly important because while we do expect this to lose a lot of the tropical characteristics, it's still going to carry that strength with it. So a lot of concerns at this point. I'd say the biggest thing coming out of the 5 p.m. update from the NHC is the fact that we now have hurricane watches that have been posted for down Maine, and also tropical storm watches that have been posted for areas further inland in Maine, and then also down into the New England area. In particular, you're noticing it all the way down towards the island of Nantucket, through Providence, Rhode Island, and also in through the Cape, as well as Boston. You have millions of folks that are wrapped up within this as we head forward. Now, is everything in concrete, solidified for sure? This is what's going to happen? No. But it is a pretty good idea of what we're going to see play out. And no matter where we see landfall with the center of Lee, because it is such a massive storm that we're expecting to be over 500 miles in diameter, those impacts will be far reaching, especially the bigger the storm, the more surf that's going to be completely shaken up, and the waves will be a concern. This is a look at the chance for those 40-mile-per-hour wind chances. Again, a bigger storm likely going to be increasing the odds of this and expanding it outward, but take a closer look and you're going to be feeling these winds from northern Maine all the way down into areas of the New York City area. All right, as we said, Lee is going to be creating rough surf. That's up and down the East Coast. On New York's Long Island, lifeguards are already preparing for dangerous rip currents. Fox 5 New York's Jody Goldberg reports from Jones Beach.
The beaches may be beautiful now, but there's growing fear of erosion and rip currents come this weekend as Hurricane Lee works its way up the coast.
Rip currents are an issue. As we know, they are an issue on a regular sunny day. But with all of this water coming in, it's going to be quite significant.
While Lee won't be a direct hit, Governor Hochul announced the deployment of 50 soldiers from the New York National Guard to begin preparations on Long Island as South Shore beaches, including here at Jones Beach, will bear the brunt of any residual effects. Even though temps are expected to be warm, lifeguards are prepared to pull people out of the water altogether if rip currents pose a problem.
Saturday especially, the waves will be really big, very dangerous. We're expecting severe beach erosion, flooding of the beaches, so it'll be like a wash from the boardwalk type of situation.
They're predicting 8 to 10 foot swells and say the bigger the surf, the larger the rip current.
Depending on the tide, the moon, etc., will depend on how big your rip is. Your rip could be 10 yards. It could be 150 yards.
Now, the goal is to open the water on Sunday, which is the last day lifeguards will be on after the peak of the storm passes, but experts say it all depends on how it tracks.
If it tracks out further to the east in the Atlantic, will be great. And it would be nice to finish it up on a beautiful day.
Hurricane Franklin's wrath interrupted swimming just before Labor Day weekend, and this go-around, strong swells, while enticing for surfers, could do the same. In Wantagh, Long Island, Jody Goldberg, Fox 5 News.
And let's take a look at another possible impact of Lee, and that's going to be power outages. Maine utility crews closely monitoring the hurricane as they expect to get hit with strong winds, coastal flooding, and also some of that heavy rain.
And after a soggy summer, officials are concerned with the saturated soil creating even more problems in the area. We do want to bring in Central Maine Power spokesperson John Breed with the very latest on the preparations underway. And John, I mean, we're seeing a lot of the models come into line about the impacts that we're going to be feeling. Wind's certainly a part of the narrative, especially for you guys in Maine. And I think at this point, right, everybody should assume power could be an issue.
Hi, Marissa. Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me. Yes, we're very closely monitoring this storm. We have been for a week or more. And as you've noted on your show, the track isn't quite determined yet. It's a little to the left, a little to the right. That has our crews worried. And we will continue to kind of update our planning based on that. As you mentioned, we've had an incredibly wet summer, one of the wettest summers on record, in fact. And that has caused soil erosion, flooding, and really stressed our trees. So we have added concerns that that added stress could impact tree health, bring some pretty big trees down, and further impact the power grid up here.
Yeah, we're looking at down east Maine in that potential for the widespread because you're under hurricane watch for that portion of Maine. But we know the wind is going to be a major event, and it's the ongoing, the longevity of that wind. So you had said you're looking at the power grid. What are some reinforcement measures? What can you do to kind of prep for a storm this size?
Sure. So we have a team of in-house meteorologists. We get updates 2, 3, 4 times a day from them. We also have begun bringing in crews external to the state of Maine to support us. Our company's fortunate to have a network of sister companies throughout the Northeast, both in New York and Connecticut. They're going to make sure they're in good shape first. And if we do need those additional resources, our sister companies will send some aid to us to help us get our customers back online if needed.
And a good reminder real quickly too, while we have you, I think folks think the power's out and they're anticipating crews being out there right away. You guys have to wait for the winds to drop down to a safer level before you can get your crews out there.
That's correct. Our wind limits for our bucket trucks is about 35 miles an hour. It's just not safe for us to put our crews up in the buckets if the winds exceed that and the gusts exceed that. I think in addition to this storm affecting power outages, we've been in close contact with emergency management officials, Department of Transportation here in Maine, and we could see road closures, we could see flooding. So we're urging people to prepare like they could be impacted for a period of time in the event the ultimate track does bring this closer to our service area, closer to Maine, as opposed to Atlantic Canada. And we always issue the same kind of guidance around ensuring generators are gassed up and charged, having batteries, cell phones charged fully, gas in the car. Just be prepared across the board.
Yeah, I want to make those final preps today into tomorrow and be prepared Friday through the weekend. John Breed, Central Maine Power spokesperson, thank you for joining us here on Fox Weather.
Thank you.
And we're going to continue to track Lee, and when we come back, hurricane and tropical storm watches, they're now issued for so much of coastal New England. We'll show you where and when the Northeast will feel the impact from Lee. Stay with us.
com.
Right now on Fox Weather Live, tracking Hurricane Lee, the powerful storm spinning in the Atlantic and heading toward the Northeast. Tropical storm watches have been issued for most of coastal New England.
And Fox Weather is your Hurricane HQ. We are keeping track of every possible scenario for Lee, all to keep you safe.
Thank you for joining us on your Wednesday. I'm Steve Bender.
Yeah, hey, everybody. I'm Marissa Torres. We do appreciate you joining us here on Fox Weather Live. We're going to continue to break down everything you need to know about Lee, every update that comes from the NHC, each one carrying its own piece of critical information, especially as these models start to come into line? You know, we're getting closer
Yeah.
to landfall.
Yep.
In where that may be exactly, still figuring out that. But I mean, things are really coming into line as we get closer to the
Better
end.
agreement today.
Yeah.
And really in the last few hours, the Euro model was kind of hanging back out to the east, and now that's kind of going shifted back in line with our exclusive Fox model, the GFS model, and really the consensus. So let's talk about, because of that change now, what could be the impact? We'll bring you live into Bermuda, where Lee is still about 380 miles south of this location there. But the wind is going to be starting to pick up, and they're going to be feeling the rain by tomorrow. And so that rough surf is going to really enhance tomorrow into Friday. That's when they'll feel the focal point. So you saw right in the foreground, the palm tree kind of swaying. That's going to pick up. It's going to intensify here in the next 24 hours. And so what we're looking at out of this storm is it's starting to pick up pace, 10 miles per hour, right? Moving faster to the winds. If you're just joining us and you're checking in, we're down to 105 now. So that's putting it at a Cat 2 status. It's no longer a major hurricane, but still it is it's a big hurricane. And that's a massive wind field that's going to generate all this energy from the Atlantic. And really, just to show you how far off the coast it is, this is a measurement from the Florida coast, right? It actually looks like right from West Palm Beach to there, 771 miles. The other reference point that they're using is Nantucket, and that's about 965 miles to the north. So it's well out over water, but here's the track as it moves north in the Atlantic, and you'll see that in yellow, those areas are underneath that tropical storm watch. That does include Boston, Providence, Nantucket, Portland, and then you get into down East Maine, and they're in that hurricane watch, which means they could get those 75 mile per hour or greater with the intensity and the wind. Now remember, I have to remind you, the cone is going to be where the center of this storm could move. The impact's going to be well beyond, and this is a system to really focus in on that because of how broad this is. And this is what we were talking about before, right off the top, Marissa and I. You can barely differentiate where the Euro is now, right? They're all overlapping. The spaghetti plot looks like a braid now. That's a good sign. That's confidence ahead. But I do want you to look at this where there's that wobbling that happens, right? It's not a definitive straight line. There's still that little S curve. And with that, that means we are forecasting, at least the models are showing, that there will be some kind of movement. And with that, you'll have some outliers that show that there could be still some that swing it back to the west and move towards Cape Cod. But the general consensus is right in the heart of that cone. And when we look at that, it's a good sign if it stays a little further to the east because the bulk of the rain will be out over water, but still looking at spots like down East Maine all the way to the Canadian border, looking at 3 to 5 inches of rain, some spots north of a half of a foot.
All right, and we do want to continue to break down what Lee is going to do as it continues to push to the north in specific areas and those areas of concern. As we mentioned earlier, we do have hurricane watches, tropical storm watches that have been issued for portions of New England as well as Maine. So let's go ahead and take it over to Bar Harbor, Maine. This is one area that we're certainly going to be feeling the impacts of Lee. I think no matter how we spell it at this point. In terms of rainfall, right now we're talking about the potential of 2 to 3 inches of rain. The timing the worst conditions would be Saturday in through Sunday. Saturday, you have that threat for some wind gusts that could be above 60 miles per hour. That potential for maybe some hurricane force winds, especially some gusts especially. And then you're talking about storm surge up to 3 feet. So there's going to be a lot of things that shift depending on where we see the center of Lee track, where the heaviest rain will fall, and how far maybe inland some of those really gusty winds get. So certainly for the coast, I think you're going to be feeling the strong winds. And I think that high pressure to the north is going to play a little bit of a role, set up a little bit more of a pressure gradient, and maybe enhance some of these winds as well. This is more of a northerly wind, so an offshore wind pushing away from Portland, Augusta, Bangor, where you can see some of those winds Friday night start to pick up 20 to 30 miles per hour with those gusts only intensifying as you head in through Sunday. And you're noticing it does head to interior portions of Maine too. That's why everybody really statewide should be preparing for the potential of some power outages. Again, worse at the coast, even by Sunday morning, still feeling gusty as we wait for Lee to pull away. Now, a really big part of this equation as we watch what the coastal areas are going to be doing, high and low tide. We have a new moon tomorrow. So that could enhance it, of course, but you want to pay attention to moments of high tide. And in the New England area along the coast, you can have very dramatic swings in the heights with the tide. And so with that, we're looking at what? Saturday, you have high tide at 12:03 a.m. and 12:21 p.m. So we'll be watching how everything lines up. But again, that's only going to aggravate the situation. If you live near these coastal areas, make sure you're preparing, know your evacuation zone, just so you're prepared, and don't go anywhere near the rocks if you want to check out the rough waters. These aren't going to be congruent waves. You could get some very big rogue waves that are higher than what even, most of the average is out there. So you just want to be careful. The water is going to be very angry throughout the weekend.
Yes, what the National Weather Service and Maine was talking about, those sneaker waves that could be almost double in size. And while all eyes are on Lee, well, the hurricane is actually the talk of the town for the National Weather Association meeting in Kansas City.
Yeah, and in Kansas City, it's also where we find Fox 6 Milwaukee meteorologist Tom Walks for this special edition of Walks Wednesday. He's out on location. And Tom, I gotta imagine you're in a room full of meteorologists. The big talk and focus is gonna be Hurricane Lee.
Yes, absolutely. It was the big talk of this National Weather Conference, guys. I am here in Kansas City, and it's been so interesting because the deputy director of the National Hurricane Center spoke, and we kind of had a talk back with him as well in terms of questions and feedback regarding hurricane forecasting. We were specifically talking about Hurricane Lee, and it's really interesting timing because we were talking about how so often there's that cone, right? And we've been talking about that cone, as you can see on your screen. And it's so important not to just focus on that cone, right? Because that's where the storm obviously is going, but it's not just about the center of that storm. And you guys have just been talking about the impact when it comes to this hurricane and the impact that New England is going to be feeling over the next couple of days. And one of their big messages that they had was don't just focus on that center of the storm track, focus on the impact, because as you guys were talking about, this is a big hurricane. It's very wide in terms of its wind field, and so its impact is going to be felt far away from the center, from heavy rain to storm surge to coastal flooding. All of those things that you've been talking about is not just tied to the center of the storm, but far out from it. So focus on the impact, not so much the exact track. So that was one of the big topics that has come out of this national meeting here in Kansas City, guys.
It's a massive meeting, and this is something that they hold annually, right? And we didn't know that Hurricane Lee was going to be happening in the midst of this meeting, but can you talk more about what's happening for the National Weather Association meeting? What's some other big talking points that you've heard throughout the day, Tom?
Sure. So many different topics were discussed, and it's great because we all get together every year and we talk about various weather topics, both with the National Weather Service, the Hurricane Center, as I mentioned, the Storm Prediction Center. They're the folks that issue the tornado and severe thunderstorm watches, for example, across the country. So we got some great feedback from them regarding how to better message the weather, right? How can we, in an easier way, give the weather story to you at home to make it easy to understand, but also easy for you to plan. And again, Hurricane Lee is really that great example. There always seems to be a storm of some sort, whether it's heat or a strong storm of some sort that centers around a weather conference. Have you ever noticed that, guys? There's always something to talk about weather-wise when a national weather conference is going on.
I mean, I think weather's always a good talker no matter what. I think it's good water cooler conversation. Yeah. It makes you just seem really interesting when you can bring up the weather. But I do think one of the things that we do struggle with as meteorologists is always making sure we convey the best messaging, the clearest messaging, and that's always something, and I think people should know, it is always something we're working on to make sure people can fully digest and interpret everything we're seeing, especially of a storm like this.
Absolutely. And, taking all of that data, as you've been showing, and making a story out of that is easy to understand, right? And easy to digest, because there's so much data. We've got the hurricane hunters, for example, with Hurricane Lee that have been analyzing the storm. So we're pouring over all of that data on one hand, and then turning to the camera on the other hand to try to make sense of that data and sort of simplify that in a way that is easy to understand and also actionable, right? Because we want folks to have something that's easy to understand. So if you need to prepare for this storm or the impacts of this storm, what you can do in an easy to understand format. And I think another big topic is trusted sources, right? There are so many sources, right, of information now, as we know, as we're on social media and everything else. And it's so important to have a trusted source like right here on Fox Weather to be able to get all of that trusted information, because as we all know, there's sources coming from all different directions. Some of it may not be overly accurate, right? So it's important to know your source when you are getting weather information as well.
Tom, I want to ask you something real quick, and not to throw you a curveball, but I was seeing on Twitter how many water spouts were over Lake Michigan today. I wanted to see if any viewers had contacted you. I know you're in Kansas City, but you're their trusted source. If they were sending you some of those pictures saying, Tom, what's going on outside?
Yes, so if you follow me on Twitter, for example, Tom_walks on Twitter, we've got some of those pictures from our viewers. So again, I'm from Milwaukee, and we're right on the shores there of Lake Michigan. Some of the best water spout photos I have ever seen coming out of those rain showers today. In fact, here we go with some of those here. Just incredible. And water spouts are so fascinating because unlike strong tornadoes that you might get out of a supercell thunderstorm, water spouts form differently, and they can often form just from weak rain showers, if you will, but the winds are coming in just right out of the storm here, or in association with the environment with these rain showers, and you can get these pretty impressive water spouts. And I will tell you, I've worked in Milwaukee now for 9 years, and I have never seen water spouts like the kind we saw today in that area. Impressive.
Never discount the power of the Great Lakes, especially Lake Michigan. A lot of magical things can happen there as long as they stay offshore and they don't hurt anybody.
Sure.
Yeah, an incredible thing. An incredible thing. Well, we always appreciate you joining us, especially when you're out on the road. Enjoy the remainder of the conference with the National Weather Service there in Kansas City, and we always appreciate you taking the time. Fox 6 Milwaukee meteorologist
Thanks
Tom
for
Walk.
having me out, guys.
Always, always.
You know Tom's about to go get some barbecue. Enjoy it. Some Kansas City barbecue. All right, Tom, thank you. We'll check in with you, hopefully, again, next week for another Walks Wednesday. Let's shift back to the Northeast now and show you some more video of flooding in West Hartford, Connecticut. Yeah, look at that. You can't separate where the river is and the park. The picnic table where normally you're side, and it would be a nice little spot. Well, that's getting flooded over. So portions of the Northeast, they're going to be inundated with rain. We got another round that's pushing through now. And remember, this is the focal point. This is the same spot where we're talking about those potential impacts from Hurricane Lee, whether it's the rain or the wind. The ground is so saturated, as you saw with that video. That's one of numerous examples of what's unfolded in the past 3 to 4 days. Here's that flash flood warning that's in place for Providence, Tolland, and Windham County. And this is really a heavy batch that's pushing over 395 over Killingly and north of Providence. And Providence, that northern area, again, had substantial rain on, I believe it was Monday, right? And so we're looking at this here in the past 12 hours alone, where you have this bullseye of 4 to 5 inches of rain near Killingly and those areas of northern Connecticut pushing towards Providence. And again, this was a spot that had already had rain earlier in the week, and they're flood prone at this point. And that's why there's that flood watch that's in place. We'll talk throughout the day how this has all been lifted, right? And so the only active spot is eastern Connecticut, and then you're starting to look at those coastal spots. Boston, you're still in it. And so we'll get another round that kind of pushes through into the evening time before it moves offshore. And then you're going to have a quiet period for about 24 hours until you could potentially feel the impact from Lee. Now, here's the good thing, though. This system right there was what was blocking Lee from steering towards the East Coast. That was what's creating that barrier, as we show you here. And so that was a good thing, keeping it out over water. Now we're going to be starting to see it clear, and honestly, it looks like a beautiful day, Marissa, for even us in the Big Apple. We're looking at a clearing trend, mid to upper 70s, and plenty of sunshine.
I'm gonna clap for that.
Yeah, right? You got to clap for those days. Those are picture perfect. We're staying ahead, though, and talking about those days that aren't quite perfect, which could be tumultuous. We're looking at the days where Hurricane Lee will be moving into the East Coast, as we have the hurricane and tropical storm watches that are issued for much of coastal New England. The latest on Lee's path and possible impacts coming up next.
Welcome back to Fox Weather, your Hurricane HQ. We do want to get to that new video from the hurricane hunters from inside Hurricane Lee. They have had about 2 flights every day for the past several days. And what you're looking at, you can see the blue skies and then the circulating clouds around it from inside the eye. The eye's been struggling a little bit. We've gone through a couple of eye wall replacement cycles over the past couple of days. But today we did see a little bit more clarity within the eye. And anytime you can see the calmness from within, I got to imagine it feels quite impressive and almost magical, right? But then you remember all the force surrounding you, and you remember that this is a massive, still Category 2 hurricane that is anticipated to bring significant impacts to portions of New England and up into Canada. So let's go ahead and talk about the very latest update. Now, this is per the 5 p.m. advisory from the National Hurricane Center. As I mentioned, Category 2 storm. It's fallen apart quite a bit, especially if you just even looked at it from yesterday. But still, it has spread out quite extensively. It's flattening out, and it's expected to grow as it heads to the north. The maximum sustained winds over 100 miles per hour and moving to the north-northwest. When you talk about the potential for hurricane force winds, well, with Lee, they're expanding 125 miles out. That's the max radius. And it goes to show not just that it's a strong storm, but it's also a sprawling hurricane. And you compare it to some of the top 5 max radiuses that we've seen with those hurricane force winds. The top would be Sandy at 175 miles there. But it's easily making it in the top 5. So a couple of things are going to be at play when we track Lee. And what you're looking at, even from tonight, you have the well-defined eye. That eye's still out there. We saw the video from the hurricane hunters. The storm is still being fueled by the warm water. But once it heads further to the north, it's going to cross the Gulf Stream. It's going to cross all that upwelled water from prior tropical systems, and it's going to start to weaken. It's going to encounter a lot more wind shear and drier air, and it's going to morph into something different. The designation will be different. The energy, the power, the force of the storm, that'll be the same. So don't focus too much on what it's going to be exactly, but it's really interesting because we're going to see the jet stream begin to interact with it. And that is going to change the makeup of how Lee is. Lee will become a little bit more embedded within the jet stream, and because of that, it'll become post-tropical. And we talk about everybody in the Northeast saying, this is more like a nor'easter. Well, yeah, it's going to kind of be more like a nor'easter in a way. Tropical versus extratropical. Tropical would be warm core fueled by those warm ocean waters. Instead, with an extratropical, which is likely what Lee is going to be, we're talking about something powered by the jet stream tied to a large-scale weather front. So that's when you start to see a warm and a cold front spawning from it and larger in size with some widespread impacts. Again, designation not so important. Impacts should be the thing you focus on. And this now, we want to take a look at a scene out of Southwest Harbor, Maine. This is from last December. And you can see how high those waves are as a bulldozer clears rocks from the road after a storm. Unfortunately, as Lee makes a pivotal turn in the Atlantic, this scene could become all too familiar for those in New England. Earlier on Fox Weather Now, Kendall Smith and Jane Menard spoke with a Maine business owner who is now preparing for potential impacts from Hurricane Lee.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And how we're preparing, I guess, is from saying something like, well, holy schmoly, this isn't going to be much. So we're right on the ocean here at the motel. So what we'll be doing to prepare is taking, as you can imagine, all our lawn furniture and decking furniture, anything that can blow loose, we want to secure. And we'll kind of watch as it gets closer, and if we end up needing to put something on the windows in order to protect them, then we will. Let's just keep our fingers crossed that we don't come to that. And at the restaurant, it's a lot more of the same. But we're going to do something a little different there. It's only about half a mile down the road, and should we lose power, and we tend to lose power in this area for far lesser things. So I think it's safe to say that it's very possible that we could. And so we do have our food cart prepared. So it runs on generators. So if we do have power outages in the area, hopefully we can still we can still help. So we'll be able to provide something for people that need it, and to do what we can, and also take care of ourselves at the same time as weather.
Yeah, Charlotte, you know, you pride yourself on being family run, right? It's such a quaint spot where you guys sit there in Southwest Harbor, Maine, you know, perfectly located just outside of Acadia National Park. You know, how's business? You know, is this storm coming